Happy Saturday, everybody. Welcome to another show. I'm doing a flashback episode, something that had been asked of me for a while, and I kind of put it off. So there was a video that was banging around for a while, and it was a conversation. Hopefully, I'm coming through okay. I had some sound setting issues. It turns out the video that I was doing yesterday, for some strange reason, StreamYard decided to. I really got to stop using this. I got to switch to OBS or something like that. StreamYard decided that it was going to default to my headset for sound out, but default to my laptop speakers when my sound's going through. So people were saying they could hear my keyboard, they could hear sounds in the background and things like that. And I was like, what? I normally didn't have that with a headset. Yeah, I would set it and then it wouldn't hold for whatever reason. So hopefully it's coming through now. I'll test it with a quick random thing. Can anyone hear me typing now? See if that goes through. So yeah, just for context for this one, this is an older video. This was shared. The source that I'm playing it, the guy picked it up. I don't know who. I think it was recorded by a Discord user named John, and I don't know what Discord this was from, but this was back a while ago. The YouTube site that I pulled this up, the link is in the description. It's Lance Plays LOL, and he has some Darth content on there. I'm not vouching for the channel. I don't know Lance. I have no idea what he's got. He's got some gaming stuff and things like that in there. I'm not sure. I think he's actually. I think he's had some talks with Darth on Discord servers. But anyway, he ended up copying this to kind of preserve it. So, and I found this from Darth Dawkins Debunked, who did a video about this a little while ago, and he had the link in his. So. I thought this was interesting when I first heard it a few years ago. I can't really. Basically, what I'm going to be reviewing is sort of the content of what Darth is saying to Mike. Mike has kind of. He seems to be decently read in philosophy, but I don't think he's got any kind of formal training. But he's got a really interesting tact that he takes with Darth that kind of seems to kind of throw Darth off. So they were almost having a cordial conversation, and there were accusations that maybe this was edited selectively. There's no way Darth could have been this calm and collected with him. But I think Mike actually kind of presents himself as as something of a theist. So I think maybe that's kind of set Darth at ease. I'm not sure. He doesn't think that an atheist is trying to own him. So, and this was a few years ago, so maybe Darth was on better blood pressure medication or something. Something was keeping him chiller. Although 3 years ago, I think it was also when he was rampaging about not getting mods in Discord. So who knows? But anyway, so I'm going to be looking at this, and I started playing this because it got brought up, and I shared the link in the comments from my last video for some people that were commenting on it and were curious. And then I started listening to it just before I went to bed. And Darth brought up some things that I think I've overlooked, just sort of some basic concepts that Darth kind of holds, kind of his basic backbone theology that he brings up to Mike here in this conversation. And so I kind of wanted to get into at least that. There are certain things that Mike brings up philosophically or terms that he uses that I think might be unique to Mike, and then I'll just have to just kind of go with it. So so that's about as much setup as it's have to do. Do keep in mind this is older. This video was shared like 3 years ago. I don't know how old the conversation is. I don't know how much older it is. Ivan Van Veen was here, and he says, Mike gets a bit of a bad rap because he's very eccentric, but I love the guy. Plus, he's seriously talented with respect to art. He went to school for art, so knows what he's doing, and I think being an eccentric artist is kind of standard. Yeah, and I looked him up, and I wasn't sure if I could confirm who he was, but back when I heard this conversation, I wanted to know if Mike was a philosopher, or what his deal was, if he'd written anything down where I could kind of further flesh out his thoughts on some of the stuff he said to Darth. And what I ended up finding out was, I think it's true. He is an artist. He seems to be a pretty talented artist. Has kind of a rough go of it. He was diagnosed, I think, probably around the typical time, probably in mid-20s to 30s, with schizoaffective disorder. Had a bad issue. Had some tragedy in his life. As far as I know, he's been treated for that, but it's something that I think he's written about. I think he had a blog spot. So, and Ivan has a few other links in there, some information about who he is. So, Ivan, welcome, and thanks for that info. Alex Baptista, thank you very much for being here. Aaron Massa, good to see you. Peebo, welcome. Deathhand, welcome. Space Lord, J.L. Warren, Bridge to the Divine, good to see you. Soulless Ape, Jason Torn, very good to see you, Jason. How are you? JC Not. Jason says, yes, I can hear the typing. Son of a bitch. Not you, the typing. Did it switch back over? No, it's saying it's the Logi head. Okay, all right. So maybe it's just super sensitive and it's picking that up. Whatever. It's a MacBook, so it has the. I mean, I don't think that these aren't like mechanical keys or anything, but they're kind of clacky. Well, we could barely hear your typing, not loud. Okay, at least it's not distracting. Maybe. Jadis Tucker. Good morning. Finally caught you live. Yeah. Well, good to have you here. And maybe nice to meet you for the first time. I don't know if I recognize your name in the chat. Um, so welcome. Josephus Rivero, you're here. Hello, hello. The game 3925, good to see you. Okay. I believe this is Boot the Door. Good to see you again. All right. Scott Duke, very good to see you. How are you? I do apologize. I've missed some speed of sound videos in the last week or so. It was a weird week last week. Very busy. Could not get caught up on anything. Mythic Roxas, good to see you. Dildo Baggins, probably my favorite username. Just admit it's angry typing. It's not. MacBook makes everyone's typing sound angry. And Lori Hayes, good to see you as well. All right. So, to anybody that I happen to miss, know that you're welcome, and that I do mean hello to everyone. But let's see. So I think we can probably get this started. I can pull this up and over. Let's see. Yep, Mike Fahl versus Dee Dee, recorded by John John. Now, the sound on this is a little weird, so I've tried to adjust this up. I'm not going to try to speed it up or anything. I'm going to let this play as best I can. There's not too much I can do with StreamYard to adjust the sound quality, so I'm going to play it a couple minutes. If anybody's complaining about sound output or anything like that, there might be a couple things I can do, but there might not be much. So if this is almost like really hard to hear, I don't know what I'll be able to do about it much more than turning it up. So let's see what I can do. Um, wasn't expecting. I wasn't really either. I was kind of on the fence about doing one today. I was watching. I slept in late, had a late breakfast. I was watching Carlton Winston talk about D-Roy, and Spooky had jumped in and was like, "Hey, are you going to do a live stream?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm kind of thinking about it." So I decided to do this. If I'd known, if I'd been planning on this one, I would have put a notification out last night, but the inspiration to kind of cover this one hit me late, even though I think 4 or 5 people have told me, like, hey, this Mike Fall video is still around out there. Find it, review it. We'd be interested to hear what you have to say about it. Again, getting into this, I don't know how much I can contribute to Mike's views on this, but I think what he draws out from Darth Dawkins about some of Darth Dawkins' views are kind of essential for trying to figure out where Darth is coming from, especially since some of them, I think, are really not standard theology for Christianity. Maybe. So, all right. Yeah, 30,000 views on this. Yeah, it's made the rounds, right? This is a little bit of like it's kind of a cult hit. It just kind of keeps ending up in circulation. People will find out about it and watch it and recommend it to their friends, and so. I mean, Lance plays. I don't even know how active the user is that published this, but he's almost up to a thousand subscribers, and I don't think he really even tries. I think he does some gaming stuff, some streaming and things like that, but I don't think he's trying to like. And apologies if he sees this and he's like, "Wait, I've been working my ass off trying to get up to 1,000." My apologies, but I don't know how active he's been. I've been subscribed to him for a while. I don't see a lot of stuff come through. But yeah, I think that might be testament to some of the not just this, but some of the other Darth content he's got on there. Because he does have some. I think he has a couple temper tantrums on here. Simus, very good to see you, and thanks for the reminder. Thank you very much. All right, so I am going to shrink myself down, and we're going to get into this, and let's see how this sounds.
An idea. Okay, so you're saying that the uniformity of nature does not mean, obviously, that things are changing or that they're not in flux. So how do you reduce the idea of the uniformity of nature? How would you reduce that?
I don't know what you mean by reduce.
Well, well, how do you define it? What are your limitations of the definition?
Well, there are several different ways of characterizing or defining it, but one way would be to say that there are
Yeah, thanks for that, Simus. Yeah, Ivan piped up very early on and said basically the same thing. And like I said, I looked Mike up, back when I first heard about this video and saw some of his art and was kind of impressed. I don't recall what his style was, but then I started. I wasn't really paying attention to that. I was trying to figure out like, what's this guy's background on philosophy and everything. Because there's a bit. I don't know if it comes across here. There was another recording where it starts off with the two of them talking, and then it's spliced over with two other people on another Discord server, and they're like, "You guys, Darth Dawkins is in Mike's room or something like that, or Mike's in there talking with him." And they're like, Mike Fahl, and I'm like, yeah. And they're like, oh my god, and there's just I mean, if Discord could make the sounds of a bunch of feet running across the floor, that's kind of what kind of the impression I got. Like everybody's like, yeah, we got to get over and listen to this. So that's what this is. So he had kind of a reputation in whatever Discord haunts he was in. For kind of throwing out this argument. So, and I don't know if that was because I don't know if these people were picking on him. They're like, oh, that's eccentric Mike, with his crazy, religious ideas. And yeah, we put him in a room with Darth Dawkins and watch what happens. But yeah, I should find. I'm going to look his art up later and find out what that's about. Maybe yeah, we'll listen to this. I'll see if I can pull it up and show people. All right. Whoa, this is an old vid. Well, this is called a flashback. So yes. Maya, good to see you. Didn't think you'd go live. I didn't think I would either. I was on the fence this morning. Thanks, Spooky, or blame Spooky, whichever way you're feeling. He mentioned it, and I was like, yeah, okay, I'll do it. I'll go live. Maybe Spooky was trying to tell me not to go live. I don't know. I'm known for not being able to read nuance, but here we go. Coming through okay for sound. Yeah, I tested it on my side. It sounded pretty good. Okay, so Mike is trying to ask. He uses this word quite a bit. How do you reduce that when you're talking about a universal? And I think this is they're going to kind of try to define terms here.
A number of repeating regularities. I mean, in its simplest form.
Right, and an example of that.
Nature operates in some law-like ways. If nature operated in all law-like ways, then nothing would change.
I don't know. I don't know if that really follows, right? But this seems kind of weird, right? Because now, what Darth is saying, Mike wants to know how he's kind of reducing. Like, okay, what do you mean by universal? And Darth seems to think that, okay, by universal, I mean that the universe, nature seems to act in some law-like ways. But then he makes this statement: if nature acted like in a law-like way every time, I guess, then it would be immutable, which I find kind of odd. Like the changes in, I mean, I'm not going to run down that rabbit hole, but let's see where this goes.
So nature operates in some law-like way.
Yeah, and
as opposed, then just one other thing, as opposed that all events are the product of chance.
That seems kind of odd. Like all events would be the product of chance versus they're operating on a law like I mean, because there's a problem I think with this setup philosophically. A god could you could have the sophisticated watchmaker kind of thing, right? Or the extremely sophisticated deist god where it designs the mechanism, winds it up, gets it started, and it plays out exactly as the designer has intended, but the designer can step away and just leave it running, right? But Darth has told other people, I don't think that's Darth's view, because he's told other people that he believes God is the energy that has created the universe. He's the beginning, and he's the energy actively sustaining the universe. So, it's probably not going with that, but you could go with that kind of example, right? It could be a law-like system and still have been built by a creator. It's just a creator that's more hands-off than what Darth is, I think, willing to admit. So.
Right, and that's what I thought was. I mean, that's what gives your argument the brilliance and the consistency, right? Is it's law versus chance, because you generally I notice argue with individuals that take on kind of a relativistic approach, and then you push them back to chance, and then they push you back to law.
Well, they have no basis to establish.
Now, this is where things are going to get kind of, I think, a little weird, even for Mike. Hello, Lukash. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Good to see you. And yeah, jails ostensibly deism. Yeah, kind of. I mean, and I think this is where these guys are going to disagree, start to disagree.
That nature operates in some law-like ways. It may be the case from their point of view. It might be a brute fact, but there's no way for them to ascertain it. And so when they reason about existence, they're presupposing the uniformity of nature whether they realize it or not.
Yeah, but I mean, the uniformity of nature isn't really being presupposed, right? You're presupposing certain regularities about nature. But if you're doing it from kind of an empirical standard, right, the scientific method is to falsify it, right? Is to check to see if it's falling apart, right? At least that's my take on it. My layman's take, right? Is yeah, you can presuppose certain uniformities of nature if they've been observed often enough, but even then you don't. You're never totally certain that they're not going to change, right? I think that's kind of the thing, right? Like, and there's two ways of kind of knowing this, right? In the kind of philosophical sense, we're not certain philosophical senses we're never certain of anything, but in a certain philosophical or a certain scientific sense, it's like, well, we've observed this, we've measured it, we've mapped it out. If this happens, then we get this, right? It's sort of a, there's a causal chain that's there. Darth seems to think that if that's not being like actively supervised by a supernatural all-knowing mind, then it would fall apart, right? And then so what we're seeing is But I would say that from a human perspective, like whatever we're seeing that we think of as normality or regularity, right, is from our perspective, right? And I think that if you zoom out far enough, take a wide enough view of the galaxy or the universe or the cosmos, what have you, you might get a perspective that it's just that it is chaotic. So I think point of view matters. I don't know if that's helpful.
And any reasoning or argumentation depends upon that belief, but they have no justification for it. And since they don't have a justification for it, then they're going to have to either abandon it, or if they don't abandon it, they're going to have to explain why they have an inconsistent criterion for belief in one core belief, namely God, that God requires justification or to be demonstrable, versus the other beliefs that they have that they don't require something being demonstrable.
Yeah, but this is a problem that he's got, right? So he's trying to say, okay, well, here's the central hypocrisy from these atheists is that they assume these kinds of things, right, without looking for further demonstration, right? It's as if they take these things to be axiomatic, but then as far when somebody posits God to them, all of a sudden they want a demonstration. Well, there's a problem with what Darth is saying here. If we know that the tides work, we have some understanding of what makes the tides function the way they do. We have an understanding of why the sun, quote unquote, rises and sets, right? We know that we now have an empirical, naturalistic explanation for this phenomenon that we see, right? We don't have an answer as to the why, but we do have answers about the how and the how frequently and to what extent and all this other kind of stuff. That's one of the advantages of empiricism, right? We can kind of measure this stuff out, get some measurements, check for consistency, check for coherency. And so when the question comes like, well, you just accept that this stuff is just happening. Like, what makes you think that the sun? Why aren't you? This is essentially what he's doing. Why aren't you just descending into the realm of a radical skeptic, where you don't know that the sun's going to come up tomorrow, right? And in a certain philosophical sense, you can't be certain that the sun will rise tomorrow, right? Because something could happen to blow up the earth, right? Right? There's a lot of different ways that things could go wrong, right? But in the sense that you're mapping it out based on what we've measured empirically, given the parameters of what we understand, the sun will rise. Right? We can't know it as a certitude, right? But we can be reasonably certain, given our measurements, given our empirical understanding of the phenomenon that is, that undergirds the sun rising. If he's trying to say like, well, I don't understand why you do this with God, God isn't just this other thing out there banging around in the galaxy. He's not the waves. He's not lightning. He's not the sunset. He's not the stars at night. Right? God is supposed to be everything behind all that stuff, who created it in the first place and keeps it running like a clock. And like you should just assume that the way that you assume this uniformity of nature that you know this so-called uniformity of nature that you're just fetishizing. This seems to be Darth's approach, right? But these are categorically different things. And he seems to want he seems to like in this conversation, I don't know if he's modified this in the years since he's had this conversation with Mike and others. I don't think that he really has. But this seems to be to me like a big stumbling block for him. Like I just don't understand why you wouldn't accept, because God isn't being offered up as another phenomenon that we can track. Right? He's being offered up as the cause of all phenomenon for which we have no demonstration other than the phenomenon itself. Right? So when somebody points out this just seems to be begging the question. The sun rises, therefore God. Trees, therefore God. And I don't know. He seems to think that this is a fault of the epistemology of atheists, skeptics.
So at the end of the day, the skeptic is inconsistent and arbitrary in their reasoning.
Yeah, and yet the thing that I think is interesting about you is that I haven't heard over the course of the time that I've listened to you speak. I mean, you'll speak about how you become convinced of God. You don't demonstrate God. Meaning you'll appeal to Scripture and exegesis in general. I mean, that's not your general approach, but that seems to be your this is how I know God, as opposed to a testimony of an experience or a type of subjective, if you will, or general experience that you have had that you might say, well, I can't demonstrate why it is I know this beyond the text. It's just that, and so that's where I'm left when I listen to you. Is that it sounds as if your theology comes down to a conviction to the text as opposed to an experience that you have had outside of the text that the text then corroborates. Does that distinction make sense?
Well, I don't have any unique experiences that are exclusive to me.
So this is an interesting claim, right? But this at this point, well, he follows this up. This point, I think, Darth is actually kind of consistent. He hasn't had any experiences, and by experiences, I think he's trying to respond to what Mike Fahl is talking about, like a religious experience that is unique to him.
Yeah, which makes you a peculiar to me, since I believe in a higher power, but my mind is based on my latter description, meaning that I have these experiences and may or may not correlate that experience. For you, you're kind of the invert. You don't have some sort of experience or testimony that is grand or great, like a lot of born agains. You're merely, and I don't mean merely in a pejorative sense. But you're merely a text-based. You're convicted to the text, sort of theist. It sounds like.
No, I'm subject to the revelation that God has given. And that revelation includes natural revelation and innate revelation and special revelation.
Okay, so he's added in a category. To the best of my knowledge, there is only two forms of revelation, theologically speaking. General revelation is the idea, and I've talked about this before, but just as a refresher for anybody who doesn't remember the stuff, doesn't track it. General revelation, from my understanding, this is my layperson's understanding, is creation around us, right? The trees are God. The sun rising is God. That's this kind of stuff. The powers of the ocean. Behold the lightning. You know, where else could they come from? But if not a God. General revelation, right? Our existence, our sense experience, and this kind of stuff. Special revelation, although the sense experience thing, I think it could also be special revelation depending on the kind of Christian you talk to. Special revelation is direct communication with God. And most Christians believe that that direct communication, so this is going to include things like when prophets talked to gods, when the angel appeared to the Mother Mary, when Moses saw God on Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai. Those are examples of special revelation, a direct communication with God or one of his angels, or there's more categories. I believe the word communications from prophets. I don't know how they're bona fide, but actual prophets, right? If they're giving you, their prophecy from God, that's special revelation, and also reading the Bible, right? Scripture also is in the category of special revelation. So when you crack that book, it's the same. It is equivalent to an angel talking to you, a prophet yakking at you, or you having all your hair turned white on top of a mountain as Yahweh brushes past you, right? Like all in the same category. Pretty cool. But then he says something about innate revelation. Now that is problematic, and he's going to explain what he means by that because I think Mike dials right into that.
Okay, and break those down and tell us your relationship to natural and special. I mean, what? Help me out there. How are you related to each of those?
Well, we're all related to it in that God's existence, his eternal power can be clearly seen through what has been made, so that men are without excuse.
Oh, okay. So that's not yeah, it's not special. It's just kind of an observation of existence. Okay, so then go ahead and move on to the next one, special.
Okay? And God has put it innately within our minds that he exists and is the creator of all things.
That's not special
So
revelation.
people
Now
have
he's
choice.
getting
They
into
can
the.
either retain that which God has put innately in their minds, or they can reject and suppress that.
That is not scriptural. I don't know what scripture he's using to support that, but that is not a concept that I understand about revelation in any way. What Darth is laying out here, and he gets into this a little bit later. Let me see if he expounds on it a little bit.
And that's where you get
Yo, you there?
I'm here.
You know,
JJ's not.
Oh, here it is.
Dee Dee's up there talking, right?
I hate his voice. I wouldn't talk to him if you paid me money.
Lucky's.
I might go listen.
Yeah, Lucky's talking to him.
Oh,
It's just Lucky and him.
Really?
Yeah, it's just Lucky and him
Oh,
talking.
Really?
Yeah, I think
Okay,
Lucky's
yeah.
gonna
Thank
win.
you, John.
I think
Thank
Lucky's
you,
gonna
John.
win.
I'm coming.
See what I mean? As soon as she finds out, Lucky apparently was Mike Fahl's username. She's like, oh shit, yeah, drops everything. Let's go.
Spend my time exhaustively trying to remove myself, suppress this knowledge.
you're not an atheist.
Well, no, I'm not. That's why I caveat it with exhaustive atheism. Meaning I attempt to move away from God as much as I possibly can. I attempt the suppression.
Okay, so
I'm trying to say that's the type. Like I'm the atheist that will say I fit within that model that you're describing. Where some of the other atheists that you've argued, I literally don't think that they agree with you that it is a suppression. I don't think that they have that internal. I don't think they would admit it. I don't think they think it. I don't think they believe it. I don't think they feel it. And you might say it to them, but I don't think that they would align themselves to that description. And it doesn't mean that it's just like they don't. Like as far as I'm concerned, I might agree with you. They might have a blind's eye to it, right? They might have a blind's eye to it. But I mean, that's how I would describe it. Like, oh, they have it. They are suppressed. They just happen to have a blind's eye to it, and that your job is to get them to focus on the blind spot and hence prevent the suppression. Well, I'm already past that. I just move into atheism in that even though I know God, sometimes I have to reject God. So I take that choice on, and that's my type of atheism, my brand, if you will. But okay, so
you're a theist and an atheist at the same time.
yeah, which is why I'm also working on my daily. That's why I'm pro contradiction.
Okay, yeah, and this so yeah, he tries to get he starts getting into some like kind of diletheism or maybe paraconsistent logic. I'm not sure where he goes, and this gets a little trippy. But I do want to emphasize this part before he moves on. So he was really talking about this whole thing. So and I think he's got that handled, right? He's like, okay, so what you're trying to say is that these people are suppressing the truth and they've moved away from it, but I don't think that a lot of these people would claim that that's their experience. They don't feel it, they don't know it, they don't believe it. That's not what they think is the reality here. What I think is interesting about this is I don't know if Darth would will make this claim, right? Almost three categories of revelation: general, innate, and special, right? And notice he didn't get into the category of special. They haven't gotten there. When Mike asked him about general, it was just, he was like, okay, by that I think you mean, experiencing reality around us, right? Darth didn't correct him. And then he asked, okay, and now special? And Darth launches right into the innate thing, right? And Darth has basically said, okay, you're all born with this knowledge, right? But you can only realize it at a certain point of maturation, right? You have to get to a point where you're neurologically mature enough where this thing kind of unpacks itself, like embedded, like an embedded software in your head. And then once you become aware of this, you have a choice to accept it or suppress it. And this sort of determines where you're going to go. That is a very novel form of Christian theology. This almost seems to me, I don't know if this is in kind of keeping with the Arminians. It is definitely not Calvinist, which is fine because Darth doesn't claim to be Calvinist. I think he's a fan of Reformed theology because of guys like Van Til. But I think if he was presenting this idea, right, to Van Til, I don't know if this concept is informed by Van Til's writings or not. But I don't, if he thinks it is, and if Van Til was actually ever explicitly saying anything like this, or Bonson, this seems to me to be a massive violation of Reformed theology, because the notion of Reformed theology is that you are under the influence of sin until grace works within you. The grace of the Holy Spirit begins to change your heart, right? That's it. That's the real dichotomy. Not this. What happens is everybody's got that planted in their head, and then once they get old enough, they realize there's a God, and then it's time. Like that's when your conscience kicks in, and that's when you have to pick, right? Demons or angels, good or bad, light or dark, this kind of crap, right? That's to me not. That's a very different kind of Christianity. I've never heard this used before, and it puts almost everything on the human. Right? It also violates the notion of the Great Commission, which, if you're not familiar or if you don't remember, the Great Commission is the idea that Jesus commanded his apostles to go out and deliver the word, to preach the word to all, to get the message out. You don't have to do that if everyone has it built into their brain, right? What's necessary is for them to grow up, come to the realization, and then they make the choice. Once they make the choice, they're going to be rewarded or punished based on the choice they make. Simple. So there's no need for a Great Commission, right? And it doesn't seem to me that there's really a need for. It seems like what happens here is that the implication of this theologically is that the Holy Spirit works to regenerate the hearts of absolutely everyone. It's regenerating everyone. You have access to this work of grace. You just have to consent to it and choose God. That's a hell of a move. I don't know that a lot of Christians think that, right? And the idea that he doesn't get into any, I don't think they get into any further detail on this, but this I think is really a key component to what he's talking about, because I think this breaks down very poorly for him. Notions of salvation in either in an Arminian sense, where you have to kind of work through this, struggle with this as the Holy Spirit's working on your heart, or something like that. Even Arminians believe in some category of grace working on you, right? It's just that if you're a Calvinist, generally you believe that that's more or less irresistible, right? In fact, they used to call it irresistible grace. I don't think they like calling it that anymore. But the idea is, if God has decreed that you are one of the elect, you will be saved, right? And it's one of the things that gets brought up is, skeptics against my will. Well, it will be your will. God will just change your heart. You will want it because that's the way your heart gets changed for it, right? Simple, right? It's a kind of spiritual, it's not really spiritual brainwashing, because it's not like underneath you secretly want something other than this salvation, right? Although sometimes they talk like that. you really do want the salvation because your heart's being regenerated, right? But in an Arminian sense, I think you have to kind of wrestle with this. Monergism, synergism, these are concepts that work on this too. Monergism is, it's one way, it's just the Holy Spirit changing your heart. It has nothing to do with you reconciling or anything like that. All of that stuff is working out as the grace kind of burns the sin nature out of you, right? You're experiencing that switch. Synergists believe that there's an individual in there, the free will portion of you, that has to reconcile yourself with that act of grace and with the sin nature and ultimately make a choice. That sounds kind of similar to what Darth's talking about, but Darth is talking about this process happening to absolutely everyone at a stage of neurological maturation, which means that grace occurs in every human being ever, always, and the same way. It's essentially when your conscience gets onboarded, and then you get to make this. Then you have to make a choice. I would argue that that's actually very childish, because if it is equivalent to your conscience, you're making that choice every time your conscience is prodding you, right? It's not one choice; it's many for the rest of your life, right? And then you could tally them up, right? Then you could get into the kind of Christianity that becomes kind of stereotypically about, well, I did more good than bad in my life, therefore I deserve heaven, right? That's a no go. That's no go for Darth, right? That can't be it, right? So it's just one choice: believe in God, don't believe in God, and everybody gets the same chance. Everybody knows it. It comes on board at some point. Now, the other implication I want to get up before I wander too much into this is the idea of Darth has been asked in the past when having questions about the idea of abortion, right? People have asked him the kind of tough question. Well, where do babies go, right? If do aborted babies or kids that die in tragedies, kids that die in car accidents, or from childhood diseases or whatever, do they go to hell? And in conversations more recent than this conversation here, he has told people that he doesn't think so, but it doesn't matter to him. That's been his answer. If God deems that those kids have to go to hell, he sends their souls to hell. He's fine with that because the God he knows is perfectly just. He's perfectly righteous. So if they went to hell, they went to hell for a good reason. God's reason, right? The best reason there is. But that's not consistent with what his idea is. If you can't make the choice until you reach a certain point of neurological maturity, that he calls it, then anybody that dies before they can make that choice just default go to heaven. So I don't understand why he's been kind of sloppy about answering that question. It seems like the entailment for the view that he's laying out here for Mike should hold for, it should be easy for him to answer the question. Well, where do kids go? Well, if it's before this maturity, before they can make that choice, of course that they're not accountable. They can't be. They can't make that choice yet. So if they die, their soul automatically goes to heaven. But he doesn't want to do that because he doesn't. I think he believes that if he's in a conversation with somebody like that, then somebody could then flip it around and do kind of the kind of trick like, well, okay, so anytime a baby is aborted, anytime a fetus is aborted or an embryo is terminated, any terminated pregnancy, if there is a soul there, then you don't need to worry about where that soul goes. That destroys that argument. Right? You can't turn around and say, well, you're harming the image of God. Well, that soul goes to heaven, right? It's blameless. It's innocent. Right, I think, but anyway, that's as much as I'm going to do that. I think that's an illustration of where people have suspected that Darth makes a lot of the stuff up on the fly at certain points, and I think this might have either he was making this up with Mike, or he's been making up stuff since, or he kind of held to this idea and he's changed it a little bit. Maybe this has fallen out of favor with him. I don't know. It seems consistent with other things that he talks about, right? But it seems extremely inconsistent when he talks about the implications of what these choices might be for Christians or non-believers, and for other theological notions like, why would Jesus tell people to get the word out when everybody's got the word in them? You just wait until your conscience comes online.
I'm putting forth, my work is on defoundationalism. It's on contradiction. And here was another thing that you do, because this is something I noticed that you like to do, that you somehow have found the principles, I'll call them principles instead of laws of logic, principles of logic, as necessarily, like you necessarily weave and form fit these.
That's an interesting question. So does a baby's soul just cry in heaven for eternity because babies can't talk? Yeah, that would be another one. Okay, well, if these babies go to heaven, do they just stay babies for all of eternity, or are they allowed to mature into the kind of mature human that they would become, right? Whether physically or spiritually. Good question. Don't know that any Christians can really answer that. And I don't think there's any scripture that really talks about that. So
These processes, I'll say them, these convictions of thinking, and you weave them into biblical discourse and reasonable discourse. And I'm not saying you're not justified in some manner of doing it. I'm just saying it isn't necessary that you do that. Meaning the text itself, the biblical text itself, may speak of let's reason over this, let's rationalize over this, let's think upon this. But nowhere in the text are they saying, if A causes B, therefore C. They're not breaking down the laws within the text. So you have aligned.
So when God says, I am, that is not establishing the law of identity.
Well, that's the thing is.
well, wouldn't the law of identity be necessary in order for God to say that, or in order for somebody to write it down first? Like, I think this is interesting. It's like the law of identity presupposes that God said this in the Bible, right? The fact that it's written down presupposes that there was a law of identity, to begin with, even from Darth's perspective. Now, if you're taking the law of identity, as a law of logic to be an observation as to how people think, right? It's necessary. Our way of thinking about things follows this kind of pattern. That's one of the patterns that it follows. A equals A does not equal not A, kind of thing, right? And we have a law of logic that is an observation of that way that our brain operates, the way that we think, and that can be applied in order to check for consistency in other ways of thinking, right? I've always thought this is a weird, because Darth's not the only one that makes this one, right? Like, well, isn't God establishing the law of identity when he says, I am that I am? No, he's not, right? Like, I think even in like the Mishnah and the Midrashes, maybe more the Mishnah than the Midrashes, but I think the rabbinical commentary on this aspect from the Hebrew Bible perspective, as they look into it, wrestle with the idea of what's being written there, the idea that I am that I am, kind of thing, that phrase. And I think there's different takes on that, but I don't know of too many scholars that I think run with this kind of apologetic. I only see that from apologists. They're like, well, that establishes the law of the law of identity, and therefore that's God basically like laying that one out. But that had to be laid out in order for him to do that. Right. Like it's sort of like the idea, like, well, if we say God exists, logic presupposes God. Well, no, you said God exists. That statement presupposes logic. So probably get nowhere with that one.
Is that you're able to make that equivalence. You're able to do that. So you're making that application. It's a principal-palic application. You can say I am what I am, or I am that I am, or the
yes. Look out. This is still entertaining what Dorothy Pooh has to say.
great I am, right? To singularize and then to move the identity. But that's why I break it down. The idea of equivalence and identity have a little bit of wiggle room. They can twist off from one another, and so my point, though, is that you're convinced that when God says, I am that I am, necessarily that echoes the principles of identity in terms of like modern logical formation.
Why wouldn't it be an expression of the law of identity?
Well, that's different, though. If it's an expression of the law of identity, or is it the establishment of the law of identity? I think maybe I'm confused. Maybe Darth's not intending to say that this is when it was established, right? Like, but it's just an expression of it, and God is saying that, like, this is synonymous with God somehow claiming to be the source of the law of identity. But then at the same time, you have to kind of wonder, like, okay, the one thing that we know about observing like especially formal logic or rules of logic, is that when we start making observations about how we think and about how we can think, those observations, which I think get codified into things like the laws of logic, where we start talking about law of excluded middle, law of identity, all this kind of stuff. I think they are ways of understanding how not only that they're grounded in observations about how we think and about the best ways that we can think about the things around us. And I think that's more or less what grounds them. So a law of logic for me is sort of like just a scientific theory, in the sense that I don't think that it exists as a decree. God has said this, and that's how we think. That's how it works, right? And I often wonder if Darth thinks that, like, if you set your mind, you can will yourself to set your thinking to mirror the thinking of God, which is to mirror his logic, right? And this will get you where you need to go. So if you are rational, that rationality is next to godliness, right? This coming from the same guy that basically tells people that the last thing that they can do is trust their own reason, which is weird. Like he'll denigrate reason enough to make sure they're like, hey, don't hold on to your own reason, right? What you need to be tapping into is God's reason, because he's the big brain here, right? The only way your reason matters at all is if it's somehow mirroring or echoing the rationality and the reasonability of God's brain. All right, let's say that has anything to do with that, right? So he'll back that claim up with you can't. There's no such thing. You're falling into this trap of thinking that your reasoning is autonomous, right? But he just told Mike that everybody comes on board at some point, realizes the nature of God, realizes the reality of God, that there is a God, and they have to choose it or reject it. What else would they use other than their autonomous reasoning, right? Because if there is no autonomous reasoning and people aren't making that choice, that means the choice is being made for them, which means no one's being condemned. I'm not choosing God or choosing sin, right? I'm going in the direction God had preordained for me, right? He decreed me to be sinful or decreed me to be holy, right? I'm either the elite or the elect, or I'm not. I'm a reprobate, or will be a reprobate. So, I anyway, as you can see, there's a lot of different ways. Mike in this conversation is going to start taking him into kind of like a logics kind of thing, especially with dialetheism. And then I'm just looking at it from like the implications of just kind of basic layperson Christian theology. I think that Darth is really far afield of where he should be.
Well, I'm not saying why wouldn't it be. I'm saying that it could be a reiteration, right? It's not a statement of the law of identity as we know it. It's a lingual statement, right? It's a reiteration. I am that I am, or however you phrased it, however it's interpreted by you. I am that I am, or I am, like in repetition, right? This is where I have conflict with your approach, right? Because you don't claim personal supernatural revelation, as I mean, when I say revelation, experience, I'll say experience, because I come from that realm, right? Because you don't have it, you substitute this. You substitute the collapse of modern logical principles, the laws of logic, and you force them into an exegesis type of read, right? You're the one doing this, right? I'm not saying you don't have your own justifications to do that. I'm just pointing out that you are doing this, right? So when you're saying that God says, I am that I am, and you're asking me, why wouldn't that be reflective or an example of the law of identity, right? It's not that you cannot apply it there. It's that you are applying it there that's in question, right? So here's your force feed. This is how you force feed the principles of logic to the biblical text. And I'm saying, well, that's wrong-headed. That's wrong-headed because of defoundational logics, because of dialetheism, because of the possibility of even understanding the term of logical explosion, because of all these other
do any logical absolutes exist?
you can posit them, yes, you can posit a logical absolute.
I didn't ask you if you posited. I said, do they exist?
Yeah, so I think Darth is already not kind of tracking where Mike's going with this, and it's not necessarily anything wrong with that, because I mean getting into I don't think there's anything philosophy and logic are not intuitive usually, and I think the stuff that Mike is kind of interested in, the stuff that he's gotten into, is even less intuitive than that. Like it's the most it's just some mind bending stuff. I don't know to how much I agree with this, because I've heard different explanations given. I've tried looking into some of this stuff, but it's hard to get like kind of a layperson's like quick example, I think, of either paraconsistent logic or diletheism, this kind of stuff where contradictions hold kind of stuff. But he's kind of, I think this is odd, because he's holding Darth to a different standard within a kind of logic, right? And I think this was an opportunity to kind of peel back a layer of the onion, because Darth is just sort of, he's content to use classical logic, and just beat up people with that. And I think this conversation with Mike should have been an opportunity for Darth to realize there's a lot more to logic than just A equals A and the law of excluded middle, etc. And despite the popularity of this video, despite the fact that Darth was relatively calm during this whole thing, he didn't really seem to take, like, I don't get the impression, like many years later, I don't get the impression that anything he heard from Fahl, that he ever looked into this further, even with the motivation of like either proving Mike wrong or weaponizing that kind of logic against interlocutors. Like I just get the impression that he just ignored this. Because even, I mean, and you don't really, if you know like where Darth is now, and you're hearing this conversation, you don't have to hear the rest of the conversation. Oh, go through more, but you don't have to hear any more of this to realize, like, okay, Darth is sitting relatively calmly, listening to what Mike is kind of laying out here for him, and this is already a very different approach, right? And Mike has said, I reject some of the approaches that you're making, because you're trying to insist on this kind of logic thing, in that, but I think Mike's initial complaint with him was that Darth doesn't, like a lot of evangelicals, draw from any kind of subjective experience. He doesn't claim to have a personal testimony. He's essentially distilled the personal testimony. He's distilled it down to everybody makes this choice once they become aware of it. Once they hit a certain point of maturity, then they have to choose God or not God, right? And that's essentially it. Right, I think he's consistent when he's telling Mike, I don't have an experience of revelation unique to me, because that tells me that Darth believes that this experience is uniform. It happens to everybody, right? And here he is talking to somebody like Mike, who is a kind of professed believer, right? He's already mentioned, he hasn't described what it was, but he's had some kind of subjective experience, something that he credits to being supernatural, a product of a kind of religious experience. And I think that's, I don't think they find any way around this, but yeah.
Exist in what manner?
That there are certain things that are absolute at all times in all places.
No.
Good. Then why should I listen to any of your reasoning?
Oh, there he is. There's the Darth we all know and hate. I mean, love. Why should I listen to anything that you say? Mike has a really good comeback for this, so we'll get back to that. John, happy birthday! I didn't realize you're reviewing my favorite DD beatdown on my birthday. How did you know? I didn't, John. Apologies, but yeah, happy birthday. And I guess everything just kind of lined up. Somebody was asking about this, and yeah, I wish I could use the Force, but I can't. I mean, it would make it easier to like grab remotes from across the room, snag a cup of coffee without having to get up out of the easy chair. MathPig, hello, good to see you. Okay, so yeah, so he's already set this up. Darth is already getting a little. He's starting to dial up a little bit of hostility. Okay, so why should I believe anything that you say if you're not going to say that logic exists or logic is an absolute or something like that? Right. Okay, so here we go.
Right. And so here, once again, you'll do the same. Like this is your rhetorical field, right? One answers this.
No. Hold on a second.
Right. Okay, then let me
I
answer.
won't be long. Just give me 10 seconds.
Go ahead.
If you
Okay, now he's going to get into an explanation. This should be good. This should be, kind of classic Darth. John, yeah, it was me asking about it. LOL. Yeah, no, I mean, you asked about it. I think you might have been one of the first ones that you asked me about it. Rascal asked me about it, and I think a couple other people had sent me links and been like, "Hey, are you going to cover this? There's this Mike Fahl video out there," and I was always like, kind of hesitant to do it because I thought I would need to dive into like the diletheism thing that this gets into, and I attempted to, but I didn't really ever find any kind of good explanations that were going to help me kind of figure out, I think, some of the later stuff that Mike gets into. But I'll worry about that as we get into the video. But no, this came up. I mentioned something about this conversation on my stream last night, and somebody came into the comments and was looking for it. So I dropped the clip in the comments for anybody in that last video that was interested in it, mostly for that guy that commented. And then I clicked on it as I was getting around for bed and listened to this beginning, and that's when I heard Darth doing that thing. What really gave me the dopamine kick was when he said that part, the part where everybody knows God. It's innate knowledge, and once you get to a point of maturity, then you have to make a choice. It becomes aware to you that knowledge is in your head, and you have to either accept it or you'll make efforts to suppress it. And when I heard that, I was like, I had forgotten about that little tidbit, right? And I don't know. I think maybe Darth wanted people to forget about that tidbit because I don't think he expresses it that clearly to people with Mike, because he presents, like I said at the beginning, he presents two things pretty clearly. One, the first one being about like he doesn't think that atheists are being honest because they don't presuppose God as in the same way that they quote unquote presuppose the uniformity of nature, which is weird because he's actually kind of he's forcing a category error, I think, and then trying to say that there's somehow it's really strange. Like they're somehow equivalent. Like the foundation for all natural things is also the same as a natural thing, and therefore we should just be able to we should just accept those axiomatically like we accept other things, which is strange and kind of tortured. But that was actually it was fairly concise. Then he got into that thing about innate revelation, which I am not going to let go of for a time being. So anybody that watches my channel, if I do comments on Darth Dawkins, be prepared. It's going to be done through the innate revelation criteria of criticism from now on. Just warning you, get ready to get bored. But again, John, happy birthday.
don't know that any logical absolute exists, and what does your reasoning rest upon?
Right. Okay. Now this is okay. So let me answer. Right, to backstep through what was the topic of our conversation, so you're not moving me down your regular, because this is your regular thrust, right? It's how you maneuver the argument. So the thing is if I answer no, right, automatically it would put the realm of what I'm saying into a relative category, or meaning a logical category. Meaning if there's no absolutes, then contradiction could occur. If contradiction can occur, then anything could happen. So why do you trust anything that I could say? Right? That's how I understand why it is your line of reasoning seems to work. Now, to answer this, if you appreciate logical explosive, the possibility of diletheism, contradictions being true, and logical explosion being something that can be considered, then if you think of logic, and this is how I think about it, right, to give you a metaphor, it'd be like watching an asteroid fields blow up, or a planet being blown up into asteroid fields, right? And that I might think of logical explosion like that, like, hey, the planet, one thing, one entity, one absolute is now a billion of billions of specks of anything. So why speak at all, right? Well, this explosion itself, kind of like the rings of Saturn, right, have different strata as it's exploding, right? And so if you look at kind of a diffuseness of what it meant to have sense in one case, and then explode the sense, right? Because it also is in a verbose form. The explosion is by definition a verb, right? It's not a noun, but it's in a verbose form, right? So if you take an explosion as it's exploding, logical explosion, right, and then you re-reduce in memory to what it meant to have solidification, to have an absolute, right? There's a distinction between the absolute and the diffuseness of the explosion moving outward, right? There's a diffusing process that goes on. So what you're trying to do by categorizing absolutes as singularities that we must agree upon in this case, and the relativists that is basically, and this is how you catch a logic. This is how you catch these logicists, is that it's either absolute or it's relative, and that's how they play the game. That's how you play the game. But when you look at it from another scope, right, which is where I'm coming from. I'm trying to come into this tangentially, kind of like a neutral monist, if you would, right? Where in this case you have relativism, and in this case you have absolutism, and you're trying to pin them, and the logic is necessarily traditional classical logic works in binaries, right? So it makes sense to pin them there. But neutral monism, you have this third class. So I'm trying to come in on this in the third class, talking about my metaphor of explosion, right? The idea that you're both. In this case, you've reduced back to a planet in time, like time zero prior to explosion, there was an absolute. This is a practical form. It's a module truth, right? At this point, we can think of it this way. In this point, as explosion is occurring and everything's moving into relativism, any point within the strata, any one asteroid from this post facto absolute can be pointed to again, become the new planet, or it itself continues in infinite explosion. The whole point, though, is that as a neutral monist coming at this binary, I'm pointing out to you that your shtick is to play the binary game, but your binary is between absolute and relativism, instead of saying, hey, this is a matter of consideration. And the matter of consideration that you're trying to pin people to is not allowing for what it means to understand the term logical explosion. You don't know what it means. I mean, you can't empathize with it. You don't have a description of it.
Are you talking about the principle of explosion?
The principle of explosion. And I'll say the principle of logic. You know, the law of identity is the principle of identity. The law of the excluded middle. The law of the excluded middle is the first most problematic of the three laws.
Is anything that you have just said true?
Well, here you go again, right? Because, okay, so when I said true is modular, right? Truth is modular. So if I posit truth is modular, what I mean to say is at any point, I can land on an asteroid and say, is it true? And I can say, yes, within the explosion, yes. In this module, yes, it is true. Meaning I'm convinced of it.
Is there anything that you have said that I am obligated to conform my thinking to?
You have zero obligation.
Okay, so then why should I pay attention to anything you say?
Now that's telling, right? I don't have an obligation to listen to you, therefore I don't care, right? Why should I, right? This I think is kind of key. I've made this observation, but there are strange people out photographing my apartment building. Weird. The it seems like, okay, so if Mike is coming at him from this perspective, like, hey, you know, you're kind of approaching everything from this kind of classical logic binary thing. It's either absolute or it's relative, one or the other. Can't be anything in the middle. And Mike is attempting to kind of get into this concept of the, you know, the principle of explosion, which isn't one that I entirely have a firm grasp on. The Darth's reaction is to just go to like, well, what, you know, by what authority should I accept anything that you're saying, right? And Fahl's like, well, you're not under any you're under no obligation to simply accept what I say, right? And then why should I listen to you? Why should I hear you out? That I think is telling, right? Because I think that informs the attitude that Darth has when he's talking to people, right? He's not just telling people like, it's not how Fahl is kind of characterizing it here, where, okay, Darth, this is your play, is to present this stuff in a very binary way, but you're not doing it from a principle. You're not doing it from an attitude of, for your consideration, consider either absolute or relative, right? and then maybe consider someone else's opinion like Fahl's, where he brings in these other options, right? These other things to wrestle with in terms of struggling with logic. Darth is that's not all Darth's doing. Darth is coming at it from the perspective of, this isn't just me talking. This is what God has declared. It is definitively right. It's my understanding of what God has written in the Bible. Therefore, it's accurate. That's 100% true. And not only this isn't something that you should consider. This is something you must accept. Right? That's an important distinction to make. Right? When Darth is presenting most of his opinions, he presents it with the attitude not of one should consider these words. It's one must accept what I say. And if you give me an argument, I'm going to give you an insult. If you give me an objection, I'm gonna cast you aside. There's no point in talking to you, right? That's his game, right? If you don't accept what he's offering 100%, right? He will tell you that, oh, it's perfectly fine for you to disagree with me, right? As long as you're not disagreeing with him while he's talking. He doesn't bring that part up, right? Because he's speaking, he believes he's speaking on authority. He's God's cop, and he's pulled you over, right? And you will listen, or you will face the consequences. Right. So
Well,
it's admirable that Mike does not fall for this in any way. Like, he just sort of treats this like, oh, okay, this is Darth's, this is kind of his hitch, right? This is like a kink in his thinking or something. Like, so we'll run with that. We'll roll with it.
the reason it's not whether you should or you shouldn't. You're in discourse with me. You're in the same room. We're sharing audio vibrations right now, right? So I'm not obligating you to comport yourself to my line of thinking. I'm giving you metaphor. I'm trying to break down how it is I'm viewing.
Okay, so how is anything that you've said substantively different than listening to Charlie Brown's teacher?
Well,
Wow. So now he's just basically said, well, how? And you explain to me how anything that you've said is any different than you just making noises at me.
You've at least followed some of what I'm speaking of. When I speak of a planet exploding, I imagine that's different than right? Meaning,
Well,
there's not.
why would it be different?
Well, it's different because the elements of my speech have certain aspects that I assume. I don't expect you to see what I'm seeing through each word, because each word itself has a different perspective on it, right? So you can pick up some of it.
Why would it be even meaningful in your worldview? I can understand in my worldview where the Christian God has constructed our basic mind operations or states of mind.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't accept the Christian worldview.
No, I also accept the
So
Christian.
how is speaking of a planet explosion meaningful? There has to be some
Because
thought in place for that to be meaningful.
You understand the terminology, right?
I was talking about logical. I was making a metaphor to logical explosion, where logic itself.
it's interesting that he said that, well, you don't accept Christianity, and Mike attempts to say, like, no, I also accept the Christian position, right? Like, Mike is going to take this position, like, yeah, I accept everything, and I can reject everything, all at the same time.
Meaning, when a contradiction exists, logical explosion occurs. What's a metaphor for logical explosion?
In order for what him to say to be meaningful, whether a planet exploding or a ball rolling in the street, there has to exist certain logical attitudes.
Well,
That's what's the question. To state that begs the question.
right,
Why
because
does that beg the question?
because the
You're assuming
topic.
something is true or false, and that begs
Right.
the question against the dialetheist.
What would you appeal to? What would you appeal to to show that identity was absolute?
Well, this is okay. Here,
Alex, the revelation of the God of the Bible.
So that revelation doesn't have any identity to it.
No, God's revelation about himself.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. I'm asking,
You
does
have
that
to
revelation... Michael, hang on a second. Darwin, I'm asking, does that revelation...
I see you're just going to talk over me.
Sorry, go ahead.
hang on. I want to take this one step. Let me answer your question then. Right, the X of identity. X equals X. I am that I how you read the Bible, and that's what God's stating in terms of absolutes, right? The X that equals X. The X is the planet. It is the noun. It is the absolute prior to explosion. That's what the X is. As soon as the planet explodes, no longer is it the X. So if you look at it both in its previous form, in the memory, in how you know it, the memory of it, it takes on an absolute. At that point, it's absolute. Post-explosion, it's no longer that. So it retains both it and not it in a neutral monistic approach. That's my answer. Go ahead.
Okay, so where were we, Alex?
I was asking you if God's revelation had any identity to it.
No, God himself is self-identical. By the way, are you the guy who has the owl icon on Google?
I am indeed.
Okay, I thought I recognized your masculine voice.
So but
I think that's Alex that occasionally shows up on these ones on my live streams. He's been around a little bit.
so that's going to be troublesome, right? So the idea that God is self-identifying. So it's something that is self-identifying. Just
No, I didn't say self-identifying.
sorry, what did you say?
I said self-identical.
Self-identical. So it's something that is self-identical. Does something have identity that is self-identical? Sorry, does something that is self-identical have identity?
I'm not sure what you mean by that, but I'll just give you a temporary.
Right. Okay. So.
Well, hang on, Alex. Now let me jump in. So, Lincoln, Abe Lincoln carcass now is identical with the idea of Abe Lincoln. Okay, go ahead, Alex.
Right. Well, the idea is that you want to. So the tentative yes that you gave, right, is towards your justification or account of identity, right? But if it's going to have this, if you're going to say yes to it, then all you've done is push back identity. So now we need to justify the identity of the self-identifier or the self-identical.
It's a different discussion. By the way, Michael, usually identity statements have the idea of being time indexed.
No, in order to speak of contradiction, we're talking, and this is what I mean, the idea of saying in the same place at the same time from the same perspective. You also, the people that are trying to reduce identity, right, to the same time index, as you'd say, right, there's always an aspect difference just by being a different person, just by speaking from behind your eyes. You're seeing the world necessarily contextually different, meaningfully different, from a different time frame, and you're always moving in time. So any reapproach back to any conversation is always necessarily different than any other time frame at any point, right? And so the idea, the absurd idea that any time right now that you're even using the term identicals, this concept of identicality is somehow contextually exactly the same and reduced in and has a discrete and necessary outline that you can compare to the last discussion you've had on identicals is absurd, because the context now has changed. Things have changed. You're in a different mode. It's a different time, and we can index this time, showing that even the conversation about identicals is contextually different.
I think did they have conversations about identicals before? I mean, I can only imagine what kind. Because I'm pretty sure, like anybody that's kind of familiar with this time has said, like this is back when I think it was a Discord server called Krillism, which I don't think he's around anymore, or if he is, he's not going by that name or doesn't have a server. But yeah, so I can only imagine what those conversations got up to.
This is the fluidity of language. This is my accusation, trying to apply laws of logic to biblical texts. You're the one that does this. You're the one doing this.
What laws of logic?
Wait, you need me to say? Now you're just playing.
Yeah. What?
The old-fashioned ones that you think are true.
That's an interesting answer. The old-fashioned ones that you think are true. Um,
I did not use what you said.
Unspoken.
Unspoken speech.
The Aristotelian ones that you hold to.
Yeah, well, I understand that there are laws of logic from within the framework of the Christian worldview that God has revealed. But when one does not accept that, if one speaks of laws of logic, what laws of logic?
One does not have to accept that those are the be-all and end-all, that those are the only way, that those are complete, any more than one has to accept that Newtonian physics is complete.
Okay, so in other words, the laws of logic is just an idea that we have about how things might work.
Not necessarily.
Okay, let me then move.
You made the comparison to Newtonian physics. Newtonian physics were.
Yes, I did, in order to make an analogy to the fact that Newtonian physics hold, and yet they were incomplete.
Okay, so the laws of logic are just an idea we have from inductive reasoning.
That's not at all what I said. I mean, this is Michael's conversation. I was just trying to clarify what he was saying.
Okay.
No, and I agree. And I wanted to jump here, right? Let's jump to Revelation, Book of Revelation.
well, it was nice of her. I mean, she kind of backed off on that. Like, oh, by the way, I just wanted to clarify this is my conversation with you. And I think she was the same one that John went to and was like, hey, Lucky's talking to Darth. And she's like, oh shit. Let me highlight this here. Jefferson, I will be hosting a live stream on October 5th, 2022 for Atheist Appreciation Day. I will be talking about approximately 250 YouTube channels. Oh, okay. I will do my best to show up. I don't know, what day is that? Is that like in the middle of the week? Wednesday? It's on Yom Kippur. Okay, interesting. Yeah, that is Wednesday. That's what I thought. Yeah, I will do my best to be there. Depending on what time you're going on. If it's while I'm working, I might be kind of in or out. But yeah, I'll keep an eye out for it. Thanks, Randolph. David asks, have you seen Gondless Girl's new video with Dong Dong and his Stooge crew tag team a guy named Mulder? No, I don't. I didn't see that one. Somebody else mentioned that one above. I think I've seen Mulder in some of like the Tom Rabbit videos or Clubhouse videos. So he's either been in the room or Darth's taken a swipe at him before. Maybe Mulder was talking to like JJ or not JJ, JT or J Robin or somebody like that. It'll be announced on my YouTube channel later today. Okay, yeah, I'll keep an eye out for it. Thanks, Randolph. How long do you think before Darth has driven everyone away from him? Well, he won't drive everyone away from him. He'll just drive away to anybody that previously spoke with him, right? But he'll always I think I made this observation before. I think he's always eager to talk to brand new people, so that he can kind of either catch them unawares or just add a new name. Even if it's a sock account, add a new name to his list of trolls. He's just like notches on the belt kind of thing, or notches on the head post, probably head post, bed post. Jesus, get it together. I'm starting to get into like nap mode, which is sad because I'm on my second cup of coffee.
Is in the Bible now, right? And
Which book?
the Book of Revelations.
Oh, there's no such book.
Well, you pronounce it for me.
The Revelation of St. John.
It's Revelation.
Now he's getting petty. This is a frequent one. He's done this to other people. There's a few other people that have done this where somebody casually says, the Book of Revelations, right? No, there's no such book. But you know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah, drop the S. No, oh, okay, now I get it. Now I understand. Like, okay, so you just had to pretend to lose any concept of charity because somebody put an S on the Book of Revelation. Okay. It'd really melt these guys' brain when you talk about all the other books of Revelation that were left out of the canon. But yeah, it is. She was right. It's the Revelation of St. John.
Revelation, Book of Revelation. Okay. So within this text, within this last part of the text, or this last part of the Bible, you at this point If we speak of a dragon with 7 heads and 10 crowns, right? A red dragon, right? Now,
Dragon.
like the book of Psalms, I think, or some other figurative form of language. At some point, the Bible thumper, not to put you in that category, not trying to be pejorative, but the Bible thumper,
That's fine.
okay, will necessarily
Darth accepts it. Yeah, that's fine. I thump Bibles. I thump the hell out of them.
read the form of language in one book to have a certain figurative meaning that means something here, right? And it does, and then in another part of the Bible, something becomes a little bit more literal and is taken directly. So parables, and then figurative speech, literal speech. By the time we get to the book of Revelation, right, now we're speaking of items, red dragons, 10 crowns on 7 heads. And so I'm wondering, first of all, I guess I should premise, how do you describe the last, and probably maybe the ending point, the end of the slide of the Bible? How do you first describe the type of lingual use that's going on in here? And then how do you apply logic, right? Logic and identity to this red dragon with 7 heads and 10 crowns. Okay, go ahead.
I'm going to try to sum this up as briefly as possible. I think he did a good job there. So I think he's pointing out something that gets addressed a lot. I've heard Dr. Bowen go off on this occasionally, criticizing apologists, where they are very selective about the aspects of the Bible that we should take like completely literally, and the aspects of the Bible when they decide, no, you don't understand, atheist. That's meant to be taken. That's hyperbole. That's hyperbolic language, or that's metaphor, or that's poetry, or it's dramatic license, or that's the fine print. Nobody reads that part. Or it's meant to be, and it's weird how it flips sometimes, right? Because there's a lot of Christians that take the Book of Revelation images to be either like these things are going to come to pass in as real a way as possible, right? Or they feed in a bunch of different conspiracy theories into it, because the language in the Book of Revelation is just sort of like fuels that. Yeah, so I think this is a good approach for him to do. But it's an interesting take for him to be like, okay, how does this law of identity apply to something identified like the red dragon in the Book of Revelation? Go Darth, go! And I wonder if he's just going to come back and be like, well, aren't you an unbeliever? Maybe he's got something better. I'm being cranky.
It's just apocalyptic literature, and much, if not all of the symbolism John records is explained.
Continue, elaborate a little. How does it explain? Why is it merely symbolism?
If you've read it, then you.
I've read it. Oh no, I've read it.
John explains that certain symbolic figures within the vision that he saw applied to certain literal situations.
Certain literal situations. So does the law of logic being literal apply to John's vision? Or is he referring to another set of things that do exist, or only symbolically? Like, break this down for us. Apply the laws of logic to the Book of Revelation.
Oh boy.
I just did. You don't have to apply them. They're just unstated.
But you don't.
Right. Okay. So they're just stated. So these.
Okay. Is it possible? Well, what does it represent? Are they being allegorical? What's going on here?
You're like speech acts, right? Now, when you have a speech act, it's like 1 + 1 equals is a speech act, right? I don't have to complete it, right? I can just say that speech act, 1 + 1 equals, and like the Book of Revelations, right? Like the red dragon with the 7 heads and 10 crowns, it's just a speech act, right? So logically, we don't have to finish the equation. Logically, I could say X doesn't equal X. I can use that as a speech act. It's part of God's word. It's part of John's word. It's part of God and John's word. You've summed it up in one way. You haven't aligned it with logic, and so I'm going to just reverse that and apply it to how it is I feel that you're force feeding the laws of logic into the Bible, right? So now go ahead and push back on that if you would, because I'm saying I can say X doesn't equal X. It's a speech act. It's as meaningful as God's word through John. So let's hear what you have to say.
Are you denying the laws of logic?
Let's have you make a statement.
Are you denying the laws of logic in that question?
No, and yes and no.
Well, then, if you're not presupposing and applying the laws of logic when you speak, then nothing you say has meaning.
Okay, let's back up, because you were so good just like a minute ago before you pulled this Socratic approach. Your MO, right? We all watch it, right? But so here we go. We're gonna go back to
It's being very nice. Like, you were so good, but now you're getting back into the Socratic thing.
this. Now you said these are symbols that John had about the dragon, and that if I read the book, which I have, that I would know, right? And so here's where you're gonna you're going to apply the notion that you and I would be on the same page if we read the same text, when my argument is that no, people are always reading the same text, and there always is a difference, right? That's one of my fundamental arguments. I didn't bring it up here, but that's one of my tenets, right, of a defoundational type of argument when it comes to logic and linguistics, right? So what I'm saying here is, and what I'm asking of you, right, as opposed to getting a Socratic question to my question, is how is it that God can speak through John about a set of symbols that have a meaning? I think you used the term in some way, they are the case, right? And then when I say, now let's apply logic to whatever that specific case is that you think John was speaking, or God was speaking through John about those symbols, right? And I didn't what I was doing is I was asking you first, give me the type form of a language. Is it figurative? Is it parable? You use the word symbolic, right? It's symbolic, right? So now, forms of logic, logical identity, these are symbolic logic. We call logic symbolic logic. We do this for a reason, because it's a symbol, right? And so if you don't have an argument, a logical argument, as to why God, through John, would speak a red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns. If you don't have an argument, right, on that is logical, and you're going to use the word symbolic, I'm just going to point back to symbolic logic. I'm going to say, I'm going to talk of a speech act, which is doesn't have to be complete, doesn't have to go all the way through. X equals X makes some sense in one case. X doesn't equal X. In another case, right? And so I'm going to point to these symbols, X and X, X and not X, right? And what I'm asking you to do, I'm asking you to fetter out your position of the book of Revelations and the symbol of John through God, but I want you to do so logically, is without asking me a question. EF, can you do this?
I'm lost on what you're saying.
Can you just tell me what in the symbol of the book of Revelations of God through John about the red dragon and the 10 crowns on 7 heads, can you tell me what type of language God is using and what that symbol is supposed to mean to you as a Bible thumper?
It's not what it means to me. It's what the author intended it to mean.
Which is?
The dragon is Antichrist.
Right, so then what kind of language would that be? Metaphor, right? A symbol of, is it a metaphor? Is God being, is he making a metaphor, or is it an illustration of the Antichrist? Is the Antichrist the red dragon with 7 heads and 10 crowns?
Michael, really, I can't.
Okay, so now we watch. Hey, this is where you fall down. Now we all. So you don't know what kind of language this is. You can't speak of the type of lingual set, right? Because now we're outside of your shtick, your game, your logical, reductive, true or false. Therefore, this yes or no. Therefore, this Socratic bullshit. So you're being brought to the ropes. Okay, we all know this, and now you're saying I don't have time, right? Your general appeal to escape when you're brought to the ropes. And all I'm doing, and I think I've been very charitable to you. I think I'm just
He
asking
has.
you very simple questions. What type of lingual form, English form of language, are we using? Is God you? Your favorite man, your man in the sky, your Christian God? What type is he using? You said it is a symbol of the Antichrist. I said symbol as a metaphor or as an illustration.
Interesting.
Is the dragon something we should expect, and that is an illustration of something in this very uniform, consistent, non-miraculous, post-miraculous world that we should all expect, or is it not? And if you say it's a metaphor, then in what manner is it? Is it something unconscious that will appear within the beasts, and that the beast will be the Antichrist? And meaning, explain to us the very end of your favorite text by your favorite guy, JC, right? Is going over all this. Come on, and quit. See, this is kind of, and I think we know this, right? That you don't have a logical description. You're going to abandon the conversation. At the very end of your favorite man's texts, you have nothing. You got your dick hanging out, and you have nothing to say. Unless you have something to say. If you have something to say, say it.
It's like, yeah, he's very charitable. This is first, but now he's gotten to the point where he's just like, look, you got nothing here. Like, I'm asking you about this. You got nothing.
I don't have anything to say.
Okay, then fuck off out of the room, you big asshole, because I think I'm kidding. You're fine. Continue with your logic game. Play with the logicists.
Be a good host.
You know, you're a good dude. You aren't being an ass. I'm not going to try to be an ass. I'm just, being happy with the fact that you don't have a description of what kind of language God must be using.
Justified your friends, but well, keep the high ground, nothing.
I know. But I have to slide under the ground because I'm kind of anti some of his approach. My theology is like his theology.
Oh, I'm very anti his approach, but
okay, but I'll try to keep it above board. Right. But he stayed in the room, right? I'm giving him a lash, and he's staying in the room. He can't move. We're on figuring. Okay, so I'll keep it above board. Dawkins, the thing that I have a problem with, once again, is that it's you that is applying the laws of logic as you understand them, these very modern forms of logic, and you're reapplying them back to the text. And then when we bring up a different form of the text that you want this to be brought to, I brought up the perfect example. You have nothing to say. You go silent at this point.
Yeah, it's really interesting that he kind of doubled back on this because this was what, I mean, Darth had said this at the beginning. Is it not God establishing, or is he either establishing the law of identity or illustrating or providing an example of the law of identity when he says, I am that I am? Okay. So Darth had, strong opinions on what that must mean, right? And I think it necessarily means that in Darth's view, in his apologetic and in his theology. But when you get to the book of Revelation, and he's asking about this, Darth is just going to kind of hand wave it like, oh, it's just metaphorical language or something like that. Like, okay, but all right. So what does that mean, right? And it is interesting that he's been quiet. I kind of wonder, was he like playing solitaire while he was listening to Mike? Because I mean, maybe I don't know if his like ADD has gotten worse, but like normally he will not let somebody talk this long. But I think he was either curious to see where this was going to go, or he was just kind of entertained. The only time I'd ever heard this actually happen, Gus laid into him once on a Google Plus thing, and just ripped him wide, verbally speaking, right? And that's a pretty refreshing watch. But then you could tell he's just humoring him. Like I don't even know if he was listening to him, right? Like he once it's over, he just kind of comes. Are you done? Are you finished? Are you done? It's like typical Darth. Like, oh, you had something to say. You had some constructive criticism. You were quite passionate about you criticizing my behavior. I see that I I acknowledge that you're emotional about it. I disagree. Good old Darth.
Because once again,
Immune to. I guess he might be an immutable being.
your whole view of God and your view of the world, not it is appealing to this absolutism of the uniformity of your existence and your relationship to the cosmos at large, where you see sense and order and reason and rationale and hierarchy all the way up to JC being the ultimate authority and God being the authority above and beyond that. And I think it's really interesting how, because you're a Bible thumper, and this is the last book in the Bible thump, and then you have nothing to speak about, because what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to fetter out that there are lingual processes. Logic is a subset of language, right? I'm going to put that forth not as a necessary, always true condition, but as a most general condition. Logic is a subset of lingual processes, right? The Bible, the last part of the Bible, it's a form of symbolic lingual processing, right? That logic does not seem to have a direct and absolute application, right? This is my contention, right? I'm throwing that out. When I bring you to that point, you fall flaccid. You have nothing to say. The reason you have nothing to say is because at this point, that particular domain, logical subset, is not domineering all processes of linguistics. And it's definitely not describing everything in the experience of humanity. My theism comes from the insight. It's emotional set. It's a psychological set. It's a supernatural experience, right? I came to the Bible post these experiences, not prior to these experiences. That makes me a different type of thumper than you are, right? I look at it a different way. That's just me taking a tangent. So anyway, I'm just throwing all this out because I think that your approach itself is a type of abuse. I find the fact that you're trying to claw with logic, with this little game of yours, right, through the binary approach to logic. It either is the case, isn't the case. It's either true and it's absolute, or it's vague. And you'll obviously fall back to this because you're conditioned to do so. Right? I'm just trying to say this. Right? I'm just trying to tell you that it's as if you are trying to sculpt the atheist out of wood. I'm not trying to say, like, your overarching theme of trying to convert atheists. Go for it. Have at it. Haas, to use the Young Turks' use of Bonanza phrase, have at it. Go at it. Fine. Do God's work. Do God's will. Use your little carving tool. Just know that your application of logic to linguistics has its own limit. And if there is a limit there, and I think we pointed that out. I think you've demonstrated this limit, right, just by your falling flaccid. I think that's the demonstration.
I don't know how Darth didn't pick up the nickname Darth Flaccid after Mike, goring him.
Uphold. You cannot uphold because of that limitation, right? And because you are not able to speak outside of the general, often non-binary, logical, bringing other people the road stick, because you're not able to do so, I think you have failed the fight. I think you're failing by attributing laws of logic to all forms of linguistics. There, I've said my piece.
You've convinced me, Mike.
That's awesome.
You've convinced me, Mike. Clearly sarcastic. I think he just stays quiet from. Oh wait, no.
If you could hear me clap.
If you could hear me clap. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So yeah, that was Mike Fahl kind of taking on Darth's approach in general, and I think kind of specifically getting into that. I don't know if anyone I think that to a certain extent Mike's explanation like where he kind of goes with that. I don't know if anybody else is going to be able to follow, but I think the idea of presenting there's one person I'd be interested in hearing try to clap back on this. especially when Mike gets into kind of the linguistic stuff. And that would be, he's not a Darth fan per se, just kind of a fellow traveler, but that one way guy, the man with the legendary wife. Because one way likes to play around with philosophy of language terms. Frequently, it's a technique of his where if he's talking to you, he'll get into philosophy of language terms without warning, and then he kind of weaponizes that particular branch of philosophy. And if you don't know the lingo, he I'm a dirty, that kind of thing. Like he's really dickish about that. I'd be interested to hear like if he has a defense for this, or if he agrees with Fahl on this kind of thing. Like, hey, what, Christians should be able to kind of analyze the language being used in a book like the Revelation of John. Who knows? But yeah, that was it. That one's a classic one. I think it brings up some interesting stuff. I apologize for waiting as long as I did to actually cover it because I did get a lot of requests about it. This is an interesting question. Do you think Didi would be able to answer that question today? I think he would blow off people for asking it. And now, if he watches my stuff and he happens to catch this, even if he rolls through it pretty quick and he gets to that part and it gets fresh in his mind and somebody starts asking him on Clubhouse about it, I think it would just trigger him like, you watched that video with me and Mike Fahl, Lucky, and he'll just claim that they're there to troll him. But it is an interesting question to bring up to. It's an interesting question to bring up to any believer. It doesn't even have to be specifically about Revelation. I think the way that Mike kind of generally set it up, this idea that you guys as believers, right? Mike is approaching it again. He's approaching his kind of faith, right? Whatever theology he's trying to approach from a subjective experience. He had some kind of a subjective experience that led him to pursuing, religion or Christianity specifically, and then got into the Bible after that, right? And he's like kind of implying that Darth's approach seems to be that Darth is just approaching it from a purely, you can pick up the Bible and it's a logical schematic that just rationally concludes with you believe in God or you don't, and if you don't, you're doomed, kind of thing. And from that stance, trying to challenge somebody who is trying to make the Bible super rational, then asking him like, okay, but how is it that you guys use this super literal take over here, but then sort of like get kind of like a little bit sloppy over here with this, yeah, that guy was talking about, yeah, don't pay no attention to the nine-eyed dragon in the room, or apologies to Red Fang, the nine-eyed Hydra over there, in the corner of the room. That's just some metaphorical language. That's just for dramatic purposes, right? But it doesn't stop them from reaching a bunch of crazy conclusions. The Book of Revelation is a really interesting one to bring up for Christians because a lot of evangelical Christians believe that it means, that certain things are going to be carried out in the end of days, and it's about an end of term prophecy or end of the world kind of stuff, which it seems like it very much. But I think most scholars agree that it was written as sort of a polemic against Rome, right? And it was kind of an early example of a way of sort of establishing a notion of a kind of Christian nationalism, right? A Christian uprising against the powers that be, and in this case, it was the Roman Empire and their abuses on them, and and there's this talk of like retribution and all this kind of stuff, and it's about overthrowing them, right? So if you kind of lay out some of the scholarly work that's been done, translating the Book of Revelation and working through it, especially contextually what it was written for, if you just take it as sort of this screed written by a Christian who's super angry at Rome, it loses a lot of its mystical appeal for evangelicals, and I find a lot of them will end up starting to kind of defend against that, right? No, because, and this I think is actually key to what the point Mike's making, right? You want to hold on to this idea, like Darth is doing, like this is logical. God says, "I am that I am." That affirms the law of identity. There you go. 1 + 1 = 2. It's as clear and as rational and as concise as you can get. Eat it, skeptics. You have to accept it. But the mystical elements of something like the what they think is an end of world prophecy and Revelation, that also has to be preserved in order for their faith tradition to kind of stay strong. And that does seem kind of contradictory, right? And when kind of just when approached with the use of language in Revelation, Darth really didn't have anything to say, right? He either wasn't prepared for it or wasn't interested or both. But he clearly didn't take it seriously, and I think that's to his detriment. More Christians should be prepared to deal with that, even from the basic setup that Mike did. That idea, like, why is this literal and this other part not? How did you get there, right? If you read scholars, if you take a scholarly, if you read textbooks and stuff that talk about the different books of the Bible and how they interpret different things, it's kind of interesting. It would be interesting to see somebody kind of do a tally sheet, right? You compare what kind of evangelical Protestants think, and I'm just thinking, just farm them out. What do evangelical Protestants think is literally what's being represented in the Bible is literally happened, and what is figurative? Just keep it in those two categories, and then compare that kind of with what scholars would. Even though scholars, I think, would probably reject to that kind of dichotomy, you could just still kind of do it. Like, what do you guys say is probably meant to be taken literally, and what's meant to be taken figuratively, right? Match those up. I think you'd see a huge disconnect between them, right? And that would even include biblical scholars and historians who are believers, right? But they've been presented with this information. They're like, yeah, I don't think that that's gonna that's consistent, right? Like, I think that particular apologetic or theological take does not hold up to biblical scholarship, or hold up to historical scholarship. So yeah, that's pretty much it for that. I'm going to wrap it up here. Pretty good. Covered that thing in just under 2 hours. I let that one go on for quite a while because I think what Mike was saying was pretty useful. There's some pretty dense stuff in there, and again, I'm not good enough with either dialethism or or with that concept to really be able to dissect, like, whether Mike was super wrong about it or right on or anything like that. But I think where the direction that he was taking Darth in was, I think it was really constructive for Darth, even though I doubt Darth really took it that way. But for me, what really kicked me off was at the beginning when Darth was kind of summing things up concisely about his own theology with Mike, and yeah, no, I'm not going to let him. I'm going to try to make note of those. I need to start making a list of some, like, basic, like, kind of a 10 commandments of Darth's theology, so I can kind of keep track of them as I do reviews. Should have done that a long time ago. Anyway, thanks everyone for joining this stream. I hope you guys have a good weekend, a great rest of your day or evening or whatever it is where you're watching. Benghazi, Jeff is ending because I shut up. Yeah, I can't take your abuse, Benghazi, so I'm just going to get out of here. Kermit, stop lying to me. Thanks for another lesson on how to be a good streamer. I don't think that's what I'm doing here, man. I will be a good streamer if I had a talented crew of people that were capable of producing around me, because technically I cannot do that. Like, I can't. I want to sit down and, like, teach myself, like, the software necessary to, like, produce, like, or maybe even do edited content. I don't have the patience for it. I'll probably break a laptop before that happens. You're welcome, John Fapiano. I wish I could say that was planned, but it wasn't. It's just a happy coincidence. But enjoy your birthday. I hope it's a great one. I don't know if you drink or not, but if you do drink on your birthdays, try not to overdo it. And take that with a grain of salt coming from me. Although I have been teetotaling it lately, so for the last over a month now. Let's see. And yeah, thank you all again for everything. As always, the live chat's always fun. So Jeff should start over. Oh, Benghazi, you can just rewind it. Watch it at 2 speed, right? I don't think I talk that fast. But yeah, I will probably be back. I don't think I'll be back this weekend to do another one, but I will probably try to get one in probably by next Wednesday. There's a lot to cover. Thanks for the recommendation on the Mulder conversation, whoever that user is, Mulder versus Darth and maybe in his Stooges. I will look that video up and take a look at it and see what that's like. Maybe that'll be something worth covering. But there's actually a couple. Tom Rabbit had one or two that I kind of wanted to cover that are also Darth related, and I'm thinking about covering. This might wait until next weekend. The conversations that Skylar Fictions had with John Lee. If anybody's interested, I don't know, but those are pretty crazy. So, with that being said, also, if I don't know if J.L. Warren's still in here, but he's looking for votes for his Faces of Horror thing. If you're a client, I think you have to pay to vote, but it's for a charity, so you can look that up if you're interested in it. If you're obviously, if you're not, nobody's twisting your arm, but yeah, I think he's in first place for that right now, and I think it's got like 5 days left. So anyway, if you're interested in that, check that out. Randolph Richardson, who was on here, there's going to be the Discord thing happening. I will probably not be available to it. I've got to let the moderators know, but the usual convince us that God or gods exist Discord thing that they host will be on. That'll be showing up on T Jump's YouTube channel, Randolph's channel, Bridge the Divide, J.L. Warren's channel, so you can watch it in those locations. I don't know which Discord they're using this on, which server. If it's politics and religion or politics, it'll be one of the two. But that should be happening tomorrow, early in the morning. So, and I think the usuals will be there, Tom Jump and Amy Newman and that kind of thing. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check it out. Like I said, I probably won't be there, which will probably be better for some of you, right? Like, like, there don't need to be more chefs in that kitchen. But if I can, I will probably tune into it. So, and try to give it a listen. So anyway, I've rambled on enough and stretching this video out too long. I'm going to get out of here and enjoy the rest of the day. The weather's actually good. So take care, everybody, and I will catch you all later. Why did I just play the intro? That's so stupid. Here we go.